Hello. So in the last episode, I shared how I'd sent a list of mine and my daughter's possessions to Mr. C, and I wasn't really sure whether I'd actually see any of the things on that list, but it made sense to be as comprehensive as possible so that there could be no further discussion about what I wanted. I hadn't included anything that you would consider to be household items on the list, though I knew that I'd walked away from that house with nothing when it came to my household stuff, and that when the time did come for me to move into my own property again, I'd be starting from scratch. And as unfair as that has felt, I knew it was for the best. That the strength of the trauma bond is unbelievable, and anything that reminded me of Mr. C had the power to set me back in my healing process. So as much as I'd contributed to filling our home with nice things, and no matter how much I wanted my computer, I knew that it just wasn't viable. I had to let it go. But when it came to my dog, things were much more complicated for me. You see, Mr. C had been using my dog as an emotional weapon since the day I had left. He sent me videos and he sent me photographs in an attempt to taunt me. He told me that he would look after her while I got myself sorted, and then he would tell me that he was going to bring her over at a moment's notice, only to change his mind a few minutes later. He told me that she was sick, that she was unruly, that she was now allowed to sleep on the bed, and that he couldn't afford to feed her. His contact about Casey was just as erratic as his contact about every other subject, and ultimately she was just another bargaining chip that he was using to leverage his power and control. Having fled to my parents' modest-sized house with one child and pregnant with another, adding a large Rhodesian Ridgeback into the mix was going to impact on everybody's lives. And since my parents already have a Rhodesian Ridgeback in Casey's mum, it was even more difficult. Now, Malika, her mum, is my first ever baby. I brought her into the family when I had just finished university, and she has just turned 11. And for anyone who's familiar with Rhodesian Ridgebacks, she's a classic example of the breed. She's placid, she's greedy, and she's pretty stubborn. But generally, she's an easygoing and calm dog. And when she was 4, she had 10 puppies, and those 10 puppies were born just 3 weeks after my eldest daughter. Yes, I had a newborn, 10 puppies, and a busy restaurant all at the same time. And to top it off, I had a lazy alcoholic of a husband who did the bare minimum to help and found any excuse he could to shout at, intimidate, and scare me once he'd had 6 pints of beer and 2 bottles of wine. In all honesty, that time is pretty much a blur to me, and how I got through it, I couldn't really tell you. So Casey was one of these puppies. I hadn't actually wanted to keep a puppy. I'd just had a baby, and I knew all too well that I wouldn't be able to dedicate anywhere near the time and energy that a puppy would need. But my husband at the time decided that he would train the puppy and care for her, and so Casey joined our family. Now, my husband lied. He did walk her occasionally, but above that he did very little to train her, and before long we had a pretty disobedient, albeit well-natured, big dog who I was taking care of, as well as breastfeeding the baby, running the business, and trying to keep myself emotionally balanced as his behaviour became more and more toxic, and I felt more and more isolated from my family and friends and the life that I knew. So fast forward a few years, and when my husband finally left our home, he obviously left Casey with us, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. She was hard work, but she was a big dog who, despite being soft as anything, definitely gave the impression of a guard dog to anyone who hadn't met her. And since my daughter and I were now living alone above a pub, it didn't hurt to have her there at all. And she was our family pet. My daughter had grown up with her. There was only 3 weeks between them after all. And you might remember that we weren't actually living alone for very long, as Mr. C moved in really quite early on in our relationship, because as the saying goes, no one's more convincing than a narcissist who needs somewhere to live. And at first he was great with Casey, but over the years and as his mask started to slip, that changed. He was good with her when it suited him, and when it didn't, she got shouted at. This was a huge red flag that I missed, and if I'm honest, because the dog was always taking the brunt of his bad mood verbally in our relationship, and since Casey is quite full on, I suppose I thought I could understand why he found her a bit annoying. But as that mask started to slip more and more, and his bad mood started to be directed at me just as much as the dog, I could also see the effect it was having on her. So in a bit of an extraordinary turn of events, when I woke up on this day 1 year ago, I had a message which said that Mr. C was going to be bringing my daughter's toys and the dog over to my parents. None of my things, but the game that I'd suspected he would start playing with the list I'd sent had now officially started. And I'd been asking for the dog for weeks, and he kept on finding an excuse or telling me why it wasn't in my interest for her to come home. And he was right. It was going to put a strain on my parents and the household, but I wanted her with me. And I wanted him to stop using her as a way to get at me. My parents were in agreement of this, and we even discussed going over and just getting her, but that would have come with a whole load of other implications because, as you know, abuse doesn't stop when you leave. And so whilst this day 1 year ago Casey did in fact come home to me, when she arrived she wasn't in a good way. She'd been in his care alone for maybe coming up to 8 weeks, and she was thin and she was losing her hair. These are all huge indicators of stress, and I felt just awful. And what made it worse was that I knew I wouldn't be able to keep Casey at my mum and dad's. With no prospect of work or a new home of our own, I knew that we were going to be there for a while, well over a year. And the house just isn't big enough for 2 dogs, and Casey needed a lot of attention. The impact the abusive relationship that I had been on was clear to see with the dog. She was anxious, she was jumpy, and she barked a lot. She was desperate for time, for care, for attention, for other dogs to play with, and a settled and secure home that I just couldn't provide her with. I had all of the love in the world for her, but I was 5 months pregnant, and the practical aspects of exercising her and training her and creating a safe space for her in a calm environment just weren't things that I could provide. And so I started to think seriously about rehoming her. At first, it was hard to even consider this as an option, but the more I thought about it, the more I talked it through, the more I understood that this could actually be what Casey needed. This dog had literally been born into my hands though, so the emotional pull was really strong. But the more and more I considered the options, the more I knew that finding the right home for her was a possibility and one that I should explore. Fortunately, there wasn't any rush for me to find her a home because temporarily she was more than welcome at my parents', and we could all see that she needed the love and support right now. We were at home every day due to lockdown, so she had lots of company. And I contacted a charity that rehomed her breed specifically and explained the situation. I explained that we'd fled from our home and that I wanted to find the perfect home for her, and it didn't matter how long it took. The lady from this charity was just amazing. She was a true angel, and she guided me through such a difficult time. After I'd spoken to her on the phone, I decided that I should write down all the qualities that I was looking for in a home for Casey. Because I knew that by doing this, I was communicating to the universe or to God just what it was that I desired. And it also made me feel secure in the knowledge that I wouldn't be letting her go to the wrong home because I'd have my list. I could try and release the guilt and the shame because I knew I'd done everything possible to give her the best life. I was so exhausted and fed up of making decisions and thinking about everything that releasing that list to the universe and trusting whatever happened from then on was really quite liberating. But for now, Casey was back with me and she was safe, and that's all that mattered. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm going to be sharing a few pictures of Casey over in the Facebook group, so do come over and join us. The link's in the bio if you're watching on Instagram. Have a lovely day, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye bye.